Yeah, hi everyone. It's always so exciting to know that folks are joining all over the world. So just as a reminder, if you need to or want to, you can turn on closed captioning in Zoom. You just need to click live transcript and then show subtitles. And definitely let us know if you're having trouble finding that. And then as we wait for folks to continue trickling in, we have a couple icebreaker questions that we would like to invite folks to answer in the chat. And so if you'd like to, let us know if you joined one of the previous sessions, the last Tuesday or the Tuesday before that. We're just curious what your main takeaway was. And then also, if you have any fun summer plans, let us know. Just put that in the chat, in addition to letting us know where you're joining in from.
Welcome all. We have Nashville. We have Hornby Island. Our friends from India. Welcome back. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon to everybody. We'll just take one more minute just to filter in some last folks, and then we'll get started so that we can hear from our wonderful panelists. For those who are just joining, feel free to answer one of the questions that Sia has put on screen here in the chat. Feel free to include your name and where you're joining us from. Wonderful. So I still see some people coming in, but just in respect of time, I think that I can kick us off and we can get started today. Welcome everyone, welcome back if you were able to join us for the previous two sessions, and welcome if this is your first session with us. A big thank you from Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights, as well as our partner Impact Justice, for coming to the third and final event of our series, Restorative Justice in Our Schools, Building Sustainable Community-Based Solutions to Conflict and Harm. My name is Laura Ostrendorf. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am the training manager for Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights, as well as one of the organizers for this workshop. And if you were able to join us before, just to cover a little bit about the first session, we were able to discuss the roots of restorative justice, which builds communities through creating spaces which address harm and move forward toward healing. And then in the second session last week, we focused on building a restorative space in our schools and communities through the affirmation of students' identities and this culture of relationship building overall. And that's really what our Speak Truth to Power program is about, because we provide education that's about human rights in terms of human rights principles like equality and human dignity and respect. But we also provide education through human rights in terms of social and emotional learning, culturally sustaining pedagogy, and restorative practices. But I also wanted to highlight that one of the major aims of our program is that we try to empower students to take an active role in promoting and protecting human rights in their communities as human rights defenders. And our Speak Truth to Power program highlights the voices of defenders from all over the world who protect human rights standards and advocacy at every local level. So that's why we're so pleased today to introduce or reintroduce our partners, Sia Henry and Cymone Fuller from the Restorative Justice Project of Impact Justice, as well as our four incredible panelists who are all working in their communities to defend human rights through utilizing restorative practices. So I will pass it over to them, and we look forward to the powerful storytelling to come.
Thanks so much, Laura, and hi again, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. So As a reminder, Cymone and I work with Impact Justice. We are a national innovation and research center dedicated to transforming the criminal legal system. And so what that looks like is we have a number of projects, some focused on significantly reducing the number of folks entering the criminal legal system. We have other projects looking at improving conditions for people who are currently incarcerated, and then also some projects focusing on providing meaningful support to people who are re-entering their communities after periods of incarceration. So Cymone and I are specifically with our Restorative Justice Project, and we work with communities around the United States to establish pre-charge restorative justice diversion programs to respond to serious harm. So again, my name is Sia Henry. I am a senior program specialist with Impact Justice's Restorative Justice Project. I'm an attorney and I have a background in doing prison and jail conditions of confinement work, and come to this work with a very deep commitment to racial justice. And I'm also calling in today from Tacoma Park, Maryland, which was originally the land of the Piscataway people. And I will let Cymone introduce herself.
Thanks, Sia. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone joining us from across the globe. It's great to see so many familiar faces and names, and really excited to see some new faces joining us for this session. It's going to be amazing to hear from our wonderful panelists, so we are going to quickly turn it over to them. As a reminder, I'm Cymone Fuller. I come to this work with a deep care and compassion for the belief that people can heal, and that in community is where healing happens. And I'm also joining from the land of the Piscataway people, which is actually in Maryland, but both Sia and I work out of our DC office for Impact Justice. So I'm going to hand it over to Sia to kick us off into our panel.
And just really quickly, and thank you, Laura, for giving us an overview of what we've already gone over for the last 2 weeks. So today, for our third and final session with you all, we are going to understand the necessity of centering the voices and experiences of those most impacted by harm, hear powerful case studies of restorative justice in practice. So we'll get to hear and spend a lot of time with our amazing panelists, who I will introduce in a second. And then also understand concrete ways that you can begin to introduce restorative justice into your educational spaces as well as your communities. So as we have hinted, we have 4 panelists with us today, and they all have various and different types of experiences with restorative justice. So first, we have rejoining us from last week, we have Reuben Roberts, who is the Restorative Justice Schools Coordinator at Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth, or RJOY, which is located in Oakland, California. We also have Stephanie Medley, who's the Director of Education and Justice at the Rise Youth Center in Richmond, California. And then third, we have Kempis Songster, also known as Ghani, who's the Program Manager at Healing Futures, which is at the Youth Art and Self-Empowerment Project in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And then finally, but certainly not least, we have Periana Zamari-Chi, who is a college student majoring in human health and performance with a concentration in pre-med, and she's located in Nashville, Tennessee. So I'm going to just kind of jump right in and get us started with, I have a few questions for our panelists, and then we're going to just open things up to folks to put questions in the chat. I will stop sharing my screen so that you can see everyone's beautiful faces. So the first question, and I'm going to start off with Reuben. So the first question is, what is your connection to restorative justice? You know, whether it's the work that you do or experiences you've had with restorative justice. And I'll first hand it to you, Reuben.
Hey, how's everybody doing? My connection to restorative justice, for me, my work started in juvenile detention centers and in group homes, and shifted to being in schools and education. And when I started, it definitely was an eye-opener, because the schools reflected those juvenile halls and those prison systems, right? And what was really important is for us to humanize not only the students, but the teachers and administrators that are leading these students, right? And in that process, restorative justice was the greatest vehicle to create that atmosphere, create that environment, to have those conversations, to talk about like real serious topics like racism and gender and all these different things. And also just, you know, just to give space for folks to be vulnerable, to speak their truth, to humanize them, to hold each other accountable, to really just give a space for us to just see each other transparently, you know. So for me personally, just seeing it from that end, restorative justice was like my first eye opener to like, oh, we can do this differently. Oh, we can actually have a conversation rather than suspending a kid and creating that school to prison pipeline, or we can have a conversation rather than expelling someone, you know, or just pretty much alienating them from the space that they need, you know. And this is, and I'm talking about young people, especially that are in impoverished communities. If you move them out of the schools, more than likely they're going to end up in a much worse situation. So for me, the biggest thing in that aspect of implementing restorative justice in schools was to have a safe space for folks to have like real authentic conversations, and also to repair the harm that's done on both ends, not just for the person that was harmed, but the person that also did the harm, and kind of understand why they did it. You know, this is a systemic issue, and it's much bigger than just like individualized situations. So I'm gonna just keep it short because I know we got other folks to speak. Is that cool?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Reuben. I'm going to hand it to you, Stephanie.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me to be on the panel. I'm very excited to be on the panel with the amazing other panelists. So for me, I learned about restorative justice after I graduated from law school. I was kind of on this track to go into criminal defense, but I learned about restorative justice and things kind of took a different turn. And I really wanted to dive deeper into how things could be done differently. And I ended up starting to work more with young people, which I totally didn't have on my radar, to work with young people. And so really looking at my community and how we can do different in the community, and how the community has power, and how do we actually harness that power to make the changes that we know we need in the community. And so that kind of started my journey on learning more about restorative justice, and to where I am now at RISE, and how are we using it in not just one area, but how do we use it as a lifestyle? And so how are we using it to change the criminal legal system? How are we using it to change how we support young people and their families in the school system? How do we use it when we're advocating for policy changes in government? And so that's really kind of how I've been working with restorative practices in my professional life, as well as my personal life.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephanie. What about you, Ghani?
Peace and light, everybody. First, I'd like to, preface my answer to that question with just a little context, so you can understand how deeply I appreciate being in this space with everybody connected to the world like this. So I am about 3.5 years released from 30 years of incarceration. That began at the age of 15 for me in 1987. The only reason I'm here is because the US Supreme Court said it's unconstitutional to sentence children to mandatory life without parole. That's the sentence I was sentenced to in Pennsylvania. Life without parole is not where you do 20 or 25 or any number of years and then you're eligible to see the parole board. You're sent to prison permanently, effectively to die in prison. And so when I say I appreciate being here, that's not just something I'm not just being polite. That's coming from a very deep place. And it's within that context that I encountered restorative justice, behind prison walls. And it was a part of my own personal growth and development. And because as a young 15-year-old boy who ran away from home in Brooklyn, New York, who actually immigrated from Trinidad and Tobago at the age of 7, and then 8 years later, at the age of 15, ran away from Brooklyn, New York, 250 miles away to Philadelphia, and joined a gang. And 4 months later, involved with this gang with other runaway children from around the country, ended up in a situation that stained my hands with blood that could never wash off. The 30 years I've been in prison, no amount of good I've done or ever will do can ever wash off, because there's no statutes of limitation on a human life. And while in prison, seeing other young people over the years follow me or being led into prison with bloodstained hands, with no idea the hands that's rocking their cradle, or how to be accountable for the harms that they've done to their community. I felt as though I felt a deep sense of responsibility, you know what I'm saying, as well as a deep sense of guilt. And so, unfortunately, in my studies, and I was studying vigorously behind the walls. I had a voracious appetite for reading everything that I could get my hands on. And when I encountered restorative justice, it kind of like represented the, I don't know, a culminating point, or, something like a final step to just an appreciation for the wrong that I've done. Because up to that point, I was reading a lot of political books and so on and so forth. And I thought my political consciousness was enough, to make me accountable. But I know I needed more than that. And restorative justice, brought it close to home for me and let me know that while I couldn't undo the harm that I caused, I surely could be responsible, in helping others, helping to avert others from causing harm, as well as for, contributing in some kind of way to repairing the harm that's in my community and changing the culture that's leading to violent tendencies in my community. And so for me, I came in contact with restorative justice behind prison walls, and it's deeply personal for me. And so it was a part of my personal transformation.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Ghani. And I'm going to hand it to Periana.
You might still be muted, Periana.
I don't see her spotlighted anymore, so we may have.
There she is.
Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Okay, I think we got that part figured out. It says that the host has stopped my video also, so I wasn't able to turn on my mic or my video, but it just said the host turned on my mic for me. So I think you have to turn my video on too.
All good. It was bound to happen. I think you should be able to turn your video on now if you want to, Perry.
There it is. Okay. Hey. My experience, how I got connected. First off, I'm Periana Zamari. I go by Perry because my name always gets butchered. I'm a student at Austin P. I'm going into my sophomore year, university in Tennessee. When I first got connected with restorative justice, I was 17. I was living in a foster home, and they had reached out to my foster mom after I had went to juvenile. You guys. Oh shoot, Rafa. It's what is it? Institute, they reached out to, I was in another program called Epic Girl And they reached out and got connected with me. And their purpose is to hold, is it just youth? Hold me and others accountable for the things that we have done, but not make it like ruin my life. The opportunity was great for me because I'm not a bad person, I'm not a bad child, and I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was great because and I was grateful for it because I didn't have to hold that guilt because I really didn't mean what I did for the rest of my life. I got to actually talk to the person who I harmed and get a clear standard level eye view understanding. That's how I got connected. I met them in February 2020 during the pandemic, and it's August 2021, and here I am still connected, and I'm very grateful for Miss Ashley and Val.
I love that. Thanks so much, Perry. And I know we've really kind of hammered in over the last 2 weeks the importance of relationships and connection and community. So I think that that's such a great testament to how restorative justice can begin to build community and relationships between folks. So the next question I have, and I know you pretty much all kind of already started to answer this, but I'm just going to ask it anyways. Why do you do restorative justice, or what has restorative justice meant to you, or even what have you seen it mean to other people? So if you want to answer any or all of those questions, and why don't we start with you, Perry?
Restorative justice, it means a lot to me, even though Miss Ashley don't know, and she's sitting right here behind the computer screen. They really changed my life. They gave me another opportunity when I didn't, they didn't have to. So I'm just grateful. It was a blessing. It was something they knew I didn't mean what I did. I knew I didn't mean what I did. And I was still able to hold myself accountable for what I did, but at the same time, not suffer all the consequences and punishments that comes with it, if that makes sense.
Definitely makes sense. I'm going to hand it to you, Gani. What has restorative justice meant for you, or why do you do restorative justice work?
No doubt. So aside from, very personal reasons I mentioned, among which is, this heavy sense of debt to pay, it's also, being able to contribute in some way to bringing about a grander vision, of a more livable world, contributing in some kind of way to the liberation or the freeing of justice from the confines of, the colonial conceptual frameworks that it's been in, freeing justice from the confines of these buildings, whether you call them city halls or criminal justice centers. Justice is not something that's stored in those buildings that gets rationed out to us, once we commit trespasses against each other. Justice is something grander than that can't be contained in any building. And it's not just something that comes after harm is done. Justice is how we meet each other, greet each other, and treat each other. You know what I'm saying? It's a lifestyle. It's how we create a culture in our neighborhoods. Matter of fact, it's putting the neighbor back in the hood, right? The hood is what we have when everything is taken out and nothing is left. There used to be neighborhoods, there used to be brotherhoods and sisterhoods and childhoods and parenthoods, but when all those things left, we were left with the hood, and we adopt that concept. And so justice about putting the neighbor and the brother and the sister and the parent and the child back in the hood and having neighborhoods and all of that kind of stuff again. So it's about creating a whole different reality. It's about creating a different lifestyle and a different culture that reduces the likelihood of violent tendencies, right? It's about love. It's what Cornel West said, what love looks like in public. And so, for me, restorative justice is about being a part of this movement to liberate justice from the colonial conceptual frameworks that it's currently in.
Beautiful. I love that, putting the neighbor back in the hood. Thanks, Connie. What about you, Stephanie?
Yeah, thank you. And Gani, I mean, when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about this one excerpt from a book, and I think it flows beautifully with what you were just saying, but I'm just gonna read a little bit of the excerpt. And it says, if we presume to know the roots of society's suffering, but do not know our own, we don't know anything at all. If we refuse to see suffering's inner origins, we will never heal the outer symptoms. If we awaken to these inner origins, we will become a healing force. We act upon the world, but we are not separate from it. We are not healing the world from afar. We are part of the world healing itself. And that's why I do restorative justice. We're all a beloved community. We're all a part of each other. We're all connected to one another. And for me, restorative practices speaks directly to that. It is liberating. And that's our aim when we're thinking about how are we advocating for and applying restorative practices.
Thanks, Stephanie. I love that quote. If you don't mind, like maybe even putting the name of the book in the chat, that'd be amazing. And then what about you, Reuben?
For me, when I say why I do restorative justice, I definitely feel like this was like my purpose. You know, I don't feel like this is not a job for me. This is personal for me. I definitely was one of those kids that needed that guidance and needed that support. And now, like for me, it's so important to, you know, be able to liberate Black and brown children in schools, because of the heavy experience that they have in this country, in America. It's just a reflection, like I said earlier, it's a reflection of the prison system. And a lot of times, you know, folks that don't have power or don't have privilege don't have a voice, you know, or don't have an opportunity to speak against injustice, right? So, you know, and especially in the school system, you know, where there's a space that's created for folks to have uncomfortable conversations, that's what's important to me. And that's why I do this work. And yeah, man, and just really, you know, my biggest thing for me is really the adults, right? You know, and I feel a lot of times as adults, you know, we don't really listen. You know, we don't pay attention. We don't give young people a voice to have their own opinion, to have their own thoughts, to see what's best for them. You know what I'm saying? And when we do restorative justice, it's all about consensus. It's all about coming together with like shared agreements. You know what I'm saying? Like all of these things. This is super important. You know, this is not a dictatorship. This is not the way we control people. You know, it should be a sense of autonomy and a sense of freedom to speak your mind, to be in a space that's actually conducive to your learning style. Yeah, man, this is why I do restorative justice, because it's just important to have a space where you feel liberated, where you feel free, and you feel safe. You feel safe. So that's why I think restorative justice is important to me, and that's why I do it. So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Reuben. And I so appreciate all of your answers. And I'm definitely hearing this theme of interconnectedness. And this idea that we don't need these complicated or top-down systems of law and order that we've all kind of just, you know, been given and been born into the society with. And actually what we really need is interconnectedness and understanding and knowing and seeing each other and having those spaces where we feel like we can be fully ourselves, but also that we can co-create the communities that we want to see, as opposed to just being handed a set of rules or handed a community that we're being asked to just participate in. And I think also just this what's underlying all of what I'm hearing as well is that none of this is complicated, right? Like this isn't something new that we're trying to ask people to buy into or to come to. This is actually just kind of reminding us or kind of, you know, reminding us or asking us to return to ourselves and what we all want and need, right? It's like this idea that, we all want to feel like we belong, and we all want to feel like we have a voice and we have a say in what happens around us and to us. So it's also one of the things that I'm hearing. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit for us. So as you all know, many of the people who have joined us today are working in various educational spaces around the world. And a lot of people are also interested in knowing about ways that they can introduce restorative justice into their schools, or at least into their individual classrooms if they don't have, control over what happens in the larger school context. So I'm wondering, what is the ideal role of restorative justice in education? Whether that's a formal or informal learning spaces, what is in your opinion, the ideal role of restorative justice in education, and how does your work intersect with education, if at all? And I'm going to start us off with Ghani.
Yeah, that is definitely a question that, can point us to a brighter future. And let me just ground my answer in, from this experiential perspective. I remember being born in Trinidad and Tobago and having to wear uniforms and as a little kid, and where the teacher could discipline you and everything. I'm not advocating for that, you know what I'm saying? But I'm just talking about my orientation with education coming up as a child, and remembering that island nation, like other island nations and countries around the world, had a very high literacy rate. I think was always a 97 and 98% literacy rate. But education was important to me at that age because it was important to the grown people around me and my family around me. That carried over when I immigrated to the US and doing very well in school, placed in all advanced grades, went to intermediary schools for the gifted and talented. But it was important to me because it was important to my mother, right? But after a while of being in America, and then during, I think it was 1986, something baleful started to seep into our neighborhoods, and that something was crack cocaine, right? And I think this is it's very important for people to study the impact of that drug on our communities and on young people's conceptualizations of education in their mind. Because up to that point, I was taught that education was about learning what you needed to learn so that you can grow up and get a good job, right? So that you can afford the things that you need in life. Basically, in the American context, so that you can achieve the American dream. That was the purpose of education. And the American dream was a nice house, cars, you know what I'm saying, or whatever the case. Basically, all material things. And it was that after a while, the importance of education in that context started to fade in my mind with the advent of crack cocaine, because it offered a fast track to the American dream, right? It started to seem like the American dream and that concept of education started to seem like a long, tedious, life-consuming, fruitless process for me. And it was that understanding in my young 15-year-old mind that helped to pull me into the streets and yank me away from my loving mother's home to 250 miles away in Philadelphia in company of a gang, chasing the American dream, but through street means. And it wasn't until I got to prison and my mother brought 3 books for me on her first visit. She brought 3 books: the autobiography of Malcolm X, the autobiography of Nelson Mandela, and Mark Mathabani's Kafir Boy. And I was able to see from reading Malcolm and Mandela, those were the first books that I read of my own volition, not because it was a school assignment. I read those books and I saw the importance of education in their lives, right? And how it empowered them, not just to change themselves, but change other people and change the environment and change the world around them, right? And that attracted me. Not only did it make me feel guilty and hold up a mirror to myself and shamed me about the puerile and selfish and wayward pursuits that I was on, and opened me up to bigger struggles that everybody else in the world was mired in. at the same time, I was helping to tear down my community. But it introduced me to a different concept of education, because neither Malcolm nor Mandela was educating themselves because they wanted a good job. Neither one of them, it wasn't about the American dream for them. For them, the concept of education was, their concept of education was learning what they needed to learn so that they could make more socially, environmentally, and ecologically responsible decisions. We need a new concept of education like that, one that that allows us, right, and encourages us to look deeply at society's problems, look deeply at the world, see what's wrong with it, what's anti-life, what's anti-human, what's anti-nature about it, and tap into that distinct human capacity to come up with ways to solve it or to fix it, right? And that is what was missing from my education. So when that person came to me and made a proposition of a fast track to the American dream, selling drugs or joining this gang, I did not, school and education at the time did not equip me with the tools to resist that, right? Because it seemed like a good proposition to me. Had I been equipped with what restorative justice would have equipped me with a greater sense of accountability to my community, a greater sense of social responsibility, right? How to be an upstanding member of my community, I might have had what it takes to say, look, yeah, this might be a fast track to $1. I might be able to get a car and a house real quick, but this is not the way to be an upstanding member of my community, which is valuable to me, right? This is not the way to help bring about a more livable world, which is valuable to me, right? And that's not what's given to us in the educational process. And so moving forward, we need a new concept of education, first and foremost, which is not just about learning what you need to learn to get a good job or get material things, but the concept of education we need to learn is about, again, how to tap into that distinct human capacity to look deeply at the world and see what's out of line with it and what's going wrong with it and come up with ways to fix it, right? How to address our apparent tendency in certain capacity to be self-destructive, right? How to, how to look at what's pushing us off the cliff, right, of humanity and survival in this world, right? And everybody grab their oar and help steer the ship around from going over the waterfall, right? That's what education is supposed to do. And restorative justice intersects with that, in my view, by teaching us those things, how to be more deeply human, how to be more socially responsible, how to love one another and be a community, right? And that's what's missing in the current educational process.
Such a beautiful reframing of the purpose of education. Thank you so much, Ghani. What about you, Stephanie? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the ideal role is really around how are we building and forming those relationships, and specific to how my work at RISE intersects with that, and the approach that we've taken is how are we creating safe school environments for young people and their families. And it takes on a lot of different roles. And restorative justice is part of that. And part of that is also how are we taking a whole school approach to the process. And that doesn't mean that the onus just lays with young people or a certain amount of teachers, but how is the whole school, everybody that's involved in the school process, administrators, teachers, young people, families, how are all of these people being connected to one another, and how are they building relationship with one another? And a big part of that is how do we move from a punishment-based system? How do we move from the over-policing of our students and families? And look at how we're building connection and creating spaces. If a harm has been committed, has been done, how do we create a space to actually kind of sit in that conflict and work on a strategy and how we can repair and rebuild those relationships? And so what it's looked like for us, not only having circles, but also how does it look to build and advocate for policy changes? How do we look at having a more positive school climate and really make that climate and culture, and how do you make that the fabric of what the whole district, school district is looking at? How are you looking at how young people have more of a say in how the schools look? How do young people want the schools to feel? And so all of that is connected into creating a restorative environment, a safe environment, and also asking adults, what do they want things to look like? How do they want to feel when they're coming to the schools, whether it's the teacher, or whether it's community members that are working on campus. And so taking all these different elements of the process, not just focusing on one thing, but really figuring out how each of these elements are important to building safe schools for young people. And how are we creating those processes to work on conflicts and not just kicking young people out of school?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Stephanie. It's like, I think that idea of having this holistic approach and having buy-in from everyone and from all the different stakeholders in a school community goes so well, goes hand in hand with everything Ghani just said, because you can kind of transform your own classroom, but if and reframe the purpose of education for your individual students. But once students walk out of that classroom, if they're getting different messages, even just within that same school community, then how are those other messages undoing everything you're doing within your individual classroom? What about you, Reuben? What do you think?
For me, I definitely say just the role of restorative justice in education in both formal and informal settings. I'll give you two different examples. For an informal setting, I worked for a nonprofit organization in Oakland that was an after-school program that was based in downtown, and kids would travel from all different schools to come to the program. And my program, I was a restorative justice director there, and I created a space for young people that were exposed to gang violence, sexual exploitation, lost family members due to homicide, and so many different things that, so many different traumas that young people went through in the city of Oakland. And the beautiful thing that I witnessed in the midst of like restorative justice, when those young people sat in that circle, none of them knew each other. None of them knew each other. And it really became like this level of trust that was built as that talking piece was going around. And all it took was one person to share like a deep story, one person. As soon as that happened, it became a domino effect. And now, like, all of these young people are opening up. They don't even know each other from a can of paint, and they're opening up and telling deep traumas and deep stories that they experienced throughout their own, life or whatnot. And it just really, for me as a witness, I was like a fly on the wall. I was just setting the space up, and I just allowed the young people to speak. And it just built like this level of trust, this level of honesty. And a perfect example is young people that might be shy, that might be timid, that might not express themselves because they have low self-esteem, they don't have confidence in themselves, they don't have a lot of different, social skills and how to, just communicate with folks, just basic things, right? And when you create a space like that, it builds that self-esteem, it builds that confidence, it builds that social equity, you know what I'm saying? To where folks feel brave enough just to speak their truth. So we spent maybe 6 months in that space of having those conversations, having those authentic conversations. And by the end of that space, you would never think that those were the same people that walked in that room, right? Those young people started out as shy, timid, or mute, if you would say, wouldn't speak, nothing. And a lot of it had to do with trauma. And by the end of that, they're leading spaces. You know what I'm saying? They're actually leading circles, because I've trained them to do restorative justice, and they're leading spaces for other young people to have these same conversations. And that just is just a pure example of like the power of restorative justice, to where you create a space, a safe space for people to talk about anything or have, you know, constructive conversations, or even just to have fun, you know, just to embrace like their inner child, right? To have that type of environment, and then, you know, allow them to kind of build that up, you know, because a lot of times we miss the mark. And to go into the formal setting in a classroom, you know, the way that the class is set up, sometimes there's young people that's sitting in the back of the classroom that's not being acknowledged, that's not being seen, that's not being heard. And it creates that. And I can attest to this myself personally. I was a kid in the back of the room that didn't speak. I didn't interact in the classroom. I didn't speak much in the classroom because it wasn't set up for me to have that type of engagement or build me up with that type of you know, that type of confidence. You know what I'm saying? So in a classroom setting, it builds that climate and that culture, you know, especially in a whole school, like that climate and that culture. If you have a restorative space to where, and this is just a physical like outlook on it, right? If you have them sitting in rows and everybody's back to each other, like in rows, you know what I'm saying? You're not necessarily setting them up to be seen. But in a classroom setting, if you had a restorative approach where you're sitting everybody in a circle, where everybody can see each other, everybody can be seen and be heard, it creates a totally different atmosphere. You know what I'm saying? I know this sounds crazy, but like when you sit in these spaces and you create this type of environment, it's magical. And I promise you, I witnessed it with my own eyes. It's magical what it does to young people. And even removes that existence of hierarchy, right? Because for me, when I walk into a classroom and I'm doing a restorative justice circle, I tell the teacher, you got to participate too. And you're no longer a teacher, you are a human being, you are a participant. And I ask like real personal questions on purpose because I want to humanize that teacher. And I want young people to see that teacher not just as a robot or just this authority figure, but see them as a human being, right? And it goes hand in hand. So when you create those spaces that make people feel seen and feel heard and also humanizes them, it changes the whole outlook and the approach of, you know, when conflict happens, right? When conflict happens on school grounds, you have and you have restorative justice that's implemented in that school, and it's been practiced in that school, you're more reluctant to just see that person as the harm that they did. You know what I'm saying? Or see that individual as that crime that they did. Like you see them more as, wow, I know you don't have a good situation at home. I know you probably walked to school with, you know, like with bad conditions. Like all of these things get seen and taken into consideration, right? And that's the biggest thing, is to be able to hear people's stories. I think this is the most important thing with restorative justice, to hear people's stories and to humanize people and to also understand why they live or make decisions the way they do, right? And when we see these things and we understand these things, we can act differently. We can make better decisions. We can make, you know, like real, you know, just thoughtful opinions about what's going on with this individual. You understand what I'm saying? So really, you know, from the informal space to the formal space, just removing that sense of hierarchy, humanizing folks, giving young people a space to build up their self-esteem and build up their character, build up their values, build up their morals. And I think that's something that a lot of young people struggle with. They just don't have the space to be well represented, if that makes sense. So I'll just leave it there.
Yeah, no, thank you, Reuben. I think that makes complete sense. And honestly, I don't even think it's just young people. I've been a volunteer college instructor in prisons working with adult learners. And I think that anytime, it's so interesting how we expect people to show up and learn and take in information when they don't even feel confident or comfortable or safe even in those spaces. So I think that makes complete sense. What about you, Periana? How would you, so again, the question is, what do you think the ideal role of restorative justice is in educational spaces, or even just how would you have liked to have seen restorative justice show up in your schools?
Me personally, I wish we're in the environment and community that I live in. I wish there was restorative justice in my school where I graduated from. A lot of kids, I would see them I was a quiet kid in school, so I always, Coach Pratcher, he used to tell me go deliver the referrals. I see the same kids' names on the referrals every week. And I'm like, dang, bud, like we gotta get this together. It's not fair because I don't just think about myself. And the reasoning behind it is because my daddy always told me that, and I wrote this, but we're gonna talk about this later. I wrote this to the man who I had to apologize to. But my father always told me to identify myself as the minority, although that I'm mixed, because that's how this world is going to view me. And so I always sided with the minorities. I have siblings who are darker complexion than me and lighter. And so it was never fair for me to watch, the little black boy always get suspended, or he finna get 10 days, alternative school, community service. But the little other kids, they just get the write up, don't do it again. The program in schools, I feel like in my community that we need is they need some type of program they can trust, that they feel safe around. That's a lot of young adults issues now. And I can say that because that's one of my own issues. I don't trust easily. I don't feel safe around everybody. I can't talk to everybody. So with that being said, I'm going to act up. I'm going to act out of character. I'm going to want the attention. Cause like, why am I here? You're useless. You're wasting my time. So let me go ahead and get the process started. That's the mentality that some of these other kids have. A lot of these other kids have. I had a teacher. I was in a lot of high schools, but I graduated from the second high school that I attended. So I ended up going back there at the end of the journey. I had a teacher that was there. Her name was Dr. Cumberlander the whole time. That was my safe person. Whenever I came back to Whites Creek, Dr. Cumberlander, I'm back. That's all I had to say. Before, she would check on me before I needed to go check in with her. Hey, P, you good? You eat, sleep? It's all about that one person who they feel like they can have that one big, great connection or bond with. A lot of teachers don't take the time to build that. A lot of teachers' assistants, different personnel inside of our school. And then when we feel like people are like, we're minors, so there's adults following adults, but we're being penalized the same way that adults are. How can we learn from our mistakes? You know what I'm saying? So, I have the same friend who did the same crime as somebody else in Nashville, where I live, facing the same time, not 18 yet. And it's just like, how is that fair to kids, but we're minors? Make it make sense in this society that we live in. And so taking it back to the school, they had safe people that they can talk to. A lot of times, these kids, they run with their schoolmates, classmates. So when one person at my school was doing something, oftentimes it was 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 other people doing it too. And so if one person had that safe person they felt like they could go to, the next person potentially would leech off of the leader and be like, okay, I feel safe around this person too. Like he just said, they sat in a circle. When one person shared their story, then the next person and the next person, the next person. But nowadays in this society that we live in, we don't want to be judged by our problems or what we go through. And I was that person once before. I used to be scared to tell people what I was going through at home or why I was leaving school for a long period of time and coming back. I couldn't tell them kids, but now I can. I'm not afraid to share my story because I knew I took the steps that I had to take and I healed and I let it go. You know what I'm saying? So, safe person, trust. That's the number one thing. You always want to take your time. I was in a facility. The staff oftentimes they got to read books about me before they got to meet me, and so they judge me by these words before they get to meet my character. And oftentimes that's how they treat us. That's what we've done before, and it's not fair because I'm not a bad person. I just live in a bad world.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Perry. And I definitely hear you and just want to first say thank you for sharing. You're definitely not a bad person. I don't believe that there are bad people. I don't really know what that even means. And I really appreciate what you just said about this idea of having a safe person, right? And so I think, especially for everyone who's calling in, who is a teacher, who works with young people, I think if you take nothing else from today, nothing else from any of these sessions, I really want to encourage you all to figure out the way to be that safe person for a young person, even if it's just one, right? Even if you can just kind of find that connection with one person. And I think another thing, Perry, that you just said that really stands out to me is this idea of, young people, they kind of, they tend to follow each other. And so, if you can make that connection with one young person, then if they have a friend who's also struggling and also needs a safe person, chances are they're going to say, hey, you can go to Miss Perry because she's great and she's gonna be a safe place for you. And so I think that's something that's really special if you can do that. So the last question I have, and we're going to start with Stephanie, is, and Reuben already kind of started us off on this and with some concrete ideas about how you can even set up like the physical space in your classrooms. But the question is, can you share some other, whether it's 3 or even just 1, concrete approaches or strategies that you use to center restorative justice in your work with young people?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what Reuben was saying, we try to implement that at Rise, as well as, and I just want to say too, because it's not just with young people, but even when we're out talking to elected officials or talking to county heads, a lot of times we want to push things on young people, but not do the work ourselves. And so part of what we do is also to be like, okay, if you're expecting this from young people, then we're expecting you to do the same thing. But everything, we kind of have 3 different things that we look at when we're working with young folks. And we do the community conferences, which is part of the pre-charge restorative justice diversion work that we do with Impact Justice. And then we also practice nonviolent communication when conflicts arise at the center. And really with both of those, it's really about how are we making those observations of what's happening, what are the facts of what happened, how are we acknowledging the impact and the feelings that are coming up. How are we looking at the different needs? And then how are we developing a strategy to restore whatever harm has been done? And all of that is in collaboration with young people. And like I said before, it's also how are we, when I'm at meetings with different people, how do I also apply some of those restorative practices? How we set up different meetings is important. How are we creating those circle spaces, the physical circle, depending on what type of circle we're holding? How can we bring music or some type of art in the space, or some type of life, whether it's a plant or something like that in the space? Really looking at the language that we're using when we're talking to people, not necessarily blaming people, and really how are we creating an atmosphere of respect for people. And one of the things that I do also want to bring up that our young people shared with us, they would always say that whenever we circled up, a lot of times it would be for something something bad or something serious that happened in the community. And they started getting a little bit of circle burnout. And so what we started thinking about is how do we also use circle to celebrate and honor people? And so also knowing that it doesn't just have to be when, you don't have to just have a circle when a harm has been done, but you can use circle process to celebrate somebody's birthday or to celebrate an accomplishment, to welcome somebody home. And being very cognizant of, you know, how we're using circle process, how we're using restorative practices was important in how we did our work or do our work.
Thanks, Stephanie. I think that that's so important, that it's not just, I forget who said this, but there was a person who was working in a school who, you know, was doing restorative justice work in their classroom, but either that class or just a school, they were only putting students in circle when something bad had happened, when, you know, a student had been lost to, you know, let's say some type of violence in the community or some other type of harm had occurred. And so I think so whenever, you know, students would show up and they saw, you know, the circle set up in the classroom, the immediate response was, what happened, right? And so like that's definitely not, you know, the approach that we're trying to kind of share and get across here, that it's really just, you know, even starting with using restorative justice, you know, for celebrations, for the, you know, that relationship building and community building. So it's not just this kind of knee jerk, something bad has happened, let's jump into a circle. What about you, Reuben?
I definitely agree. There's so many different types of circles for sure. Of course, you know, conflict and harm is centered a lot, but there's definitely community building. There's welcome circles for folks that are being released from juvenile hall into schools. We welcome them into school and give them like a space to feel supported. Of course, celebrations and all different ways to do circles, including grief circles as well when we lose folks, just to give support. But when I think of different ways that, you know, restorative justice can be used and how it can kind of like be cultivated, one for sure, it starts before you even get in a classroom, right? How you greet folks, the relationships that you build with people in the hallways, how you interact with families, how you connect with families, how you connect with other staff, how you connect with not just the teachers and administrators, the lunch lady, the custodian, the nurse, the school community manager, every single individual in the school, right? So when a conflict happens or something happens, you can use that individual to help to repair what anything like, and I can give an example. Let's say somebody vandalized something in the bathroom and that custodian has to clean that bathroom every day, right? I would probably bring that custodian into that circle and get the young person to understand the importance of this person's job and why it's important for us to be considerate to others in the community, right? That's just an example why we should build relationships with everybody within that community, right? When you get into the classroom, how you set up, like I said earlier about the desks, how you set up your classroom. Does it look welcoming? Does it look warm? Do you have plants in there? What type of colors do you have in the room? How do you set it up? Like what is the environment that you're setting when young people or anybody walks into your space, right? Is there, you know, some aromatherapy in there? Is there a little quiet corner somewhere? You know, what type of things are you putting in that space to make folks feel comfortable, right? The next thing for me is the removal of hierarchy, right? And I said this earlier, the removal of, you know, this thing of power, or it's pretty much what I say and this is how it's going to go. like removing that like immediately, right? And when you and I'm speaking from a teacher's perspective, like when you set up a class or you start a classroom, you want to come up with a set of agreements rather than come up with classroom rules. Come up with a set of agreements that's not just dictated by that person in charge, but actually contributed by the folks that are in the classroom, meaning the young people, the students, and the teacher collectively in the classroom. So coming up with agreements. Okay, so you can get up out your seat if you need to go do this or do that. You know what I'm saying? Versus saying if you get out your seat, you're gonna get detention. You know, that right there is just like a failure, or like a setup for failure, pretty much, for a young person that might have impulses or might not, you know, be able to sit still for a long time. Like you have to be conscious of those things when you as an educator is setting up a space for young people. And these are young people with all different types of personalities and upbringings. So you have to be conscious of that, right? So, you know, setting up your space, setting up an environment that's going to allow folks to thrive and be successful, meaning that you're not putting rules in place that's going to hinder them or lock them up or even cause you to have friction with that young person, right? Beyond that, just really, you know, just paying attention to little nuances or little characteristics of each person, that and that's where restorative justice is important, right? When you're sitting in a circle with folks, you start to learn their personalities, you start to learn who they are, you start to learn them as individuals. And now, oh, I know why this person does this, I know why this person might be tired in the morning, I know why this person might have, like, you know, anxiety, you know, and things like this, you know, just to really understand better how to interact with individuals in your space. So I think, you know, that's pretty much my mindset on that. It was something else I forgot. I had something in my mind. It might come back to me later, but just basic things on how to implement restorative justice in an educational setting, and to create a space that's going to be successful, not only for the young person, but for those educators as well, because you get stressed out, you get burnt out, and you react when you're in that state, right? And it's usually defensive or nasty or rude, and it just creates problems for everybody, right? So yeah, I'll just leave it at that. I can't remember what the other thing I said, but I'll just leave it at that. Thank y'all.
Okay, maybe it'll come back to you. And I just want to thank you, Reuben, for also just naming that, you know, that the school community is more than just students, teachers, administrators, that there are so many other people who are also very much part of that environment and that community. What about you, Perry? What do you think? I know that you've already made this really excellent point about having, you know, safe people, having safe adults in a school. But I was just curious, are there other kind of concrete ideas that you have for how restorative justice might be able to show up in school environments?
The last thing is, like, don't pressure the kid to keep talking about the same thing over and over again. Like, yes, it's good to hold them accountable for their actions, but at the same time, it gets overwhelming on our end. Like, dang, like, now you're making me feel like a bad person. Now you're making me feel like the worst person on earth. Like, okay, I understand, but it's more to me in my life than what I just did, if that makes sense, you know? Like, my granny could have just died, but here you are only concerned about what's at hand, what I did wrong. So just, you know, I don't know what the right term is for it, but being that person for the people who are trying to get their life together, because I am. You don't never know what somebody really got going on in their life. So just come at them with a open mind, you know, free spirit. Don't come off so rude and stuff. Sometimes it's hurtful.
Absolutely, I definitely hear that. It's kind of like, you know, approaching everyone with curiosity as opposed to just kind of pinpointing one thing and really, you know, keeping someone stagnant or just kind of defining that person by that one thing that you know about them. And what about you, Gani?
Yeah, I was just thinking about just the wealth of just the jewels that was dropped by Stephanie and Reuben, and just the wealth of just concrete steps and things to do. And I also want to lift up Perry's voice, here, like majorly, because it's her voice, that I think we really need to be tuned into, especially when we're talking about young people. And so any concrete steps for me, has to go back to this like conceptual framework, the foundations of my perceptions, because she was talking about the kind of mindset and spirit that you're coming to young people with. And so from the outset, I always want to caution myself, okay, not to allow this concept called restorative justice to become this new way of fixing our kids. It's not to allow it to become this new holistic way of fixing our kids, right? I don't care how we sanitize it or make it holistic. If that's what we think we're doing is fixing children, we're already building error into what we're trying to do. We're starting off on the wrong foot because our children don't need fixing, right? What we see in their behaviors are not the problem. Their behaviors are their responses to the problem, right? And it kind of like, I go back to what Carl Bell, who's a physician and deals with a lot of trauma patients. And he said, if a child comes to your clinic for a rat bite and you give that child, you clean the wound and give the child a tetanus shot and send the child on its way, that might make you a good doctor. If 3 children come to your clinic for a rat bite and you do all those things, it might make you an okay doctor. But if 100 children come into your clinic for a rat bite and you do all those things, you clean the wound, give the children tetanus shots and send them on their way, but then you don't go out to find and eliminate the rat, you should have your license revoked, right? And there is something out in there in our communities is biting our children, right? And so it's with that kind of understanding when we sit down with young people, I understand we're not here to fix them, right? Understanding that they're already laboring under the natural deficits of reasoning that characterizes childhood, and damn near all of them are doing it in socially toxic environments on top of that, right? And all other convergent negativities on them, right? We should be, again, in awe of how they carry what they carry and not in judgment of how they carry it, right? And so that non-judgmentalism, that non-judgmental attitude is definitely a way we need to enter these spaces with our young people. And it has to come out in our language, right? And so I'm not using terms like juvenile, right? Which is why in our diversion process, we use responsible youth, young people. We're not using terms that cut our young people out of the human family, right? Or that have negative connotations to it. So, when we say, even though I've been labeled a juvenile lifer myself, I reject the term because it's devoid of humanity. It's a legal concept that we don't use for our children. Even if our children do bad things, we don't get on the phone and tell another family member, this juvenile done got on my damn nerves. We don't say that. We say this child got on my damn nerves. We never, no matter what they do, we don't lose sight that we're talking about children or a child. They only become juveniles when we're talking about other people's children, right? And so when entering these spaces with our young people, I definitely want to convey to them that they're not other. They're not they're not another child to me, that they are mine as well. I feel connected with them as well, right? And so that plays out in the way that I talk to them, right? Definitely not constantly lifting up what they did, but I'm trying to find out what they're interested in, what they're aspiring towards, right? What their dreams are, you know what I mean? And a lot of these meetings, I take them away from the concrete jungle settings because we're in Philadelphia, right? And I try to take them away from the concrete jungle settings and meet in places like parks and green spaces. You know what I mean? Because like Rachel Carson said, there, you know, you can draw strength, you know, from the natural world. You know, there is strength and healing power in the repeated refrains of nature, you know, that can endure as long as life lasts. And so it's important to take our young people, if they're living in socially toxic concrete jungles, it's important to take them away from that scene as much as possible, especially when communicating with them, into like more removed spaces like parks and green spaces where there are trees and they can hear whispering tree leaves and the wind and birds and so on and so forth, and sounds that they don't normally hear, where the world is a little more quieter, and they can hear their own thoughts, not necessarily some music or a rap song coming out of a car rolling by that's pumping some more stuff into their head. You know what I mean? Where they can hear their own thoughts and hear your own words. You know, it's no wonder why the Gacaca courts was called the Gacaca courts in post-genocide Rwanda, justice in the grass. You know what I mean? This is what it's about. It's about, you know, getting back to our roots and rediscovering our connections to one another and to nature. And so as much as possible as we could do circles in green spaces, if the weather allows, or if indoors, if it's kind of like what Reuben said, where you have plants, you know what I'm saying, and aromas and natural scents and stuff like that, and sounds, that can play a big part in it. Because in our restorative justice process, or any kind of circle process we do, it has to be also trauma informed and trauma responsive, right? And finally, you know, connected to that is this piece of recognizing the limitations of restorative justice too. You know, while it's a term that we use, we might wear it as titles, we don't necessarily have to be married to that term, right? Or not be willing to evolve to another term that we might accept later on. Because restorative justice is a term that we started using in the 70s for things that we've been doing in ways that we've been living for millennia all around the world, right? There is no real, you know, English equivalent for this lifestyle that we've been living all around the world, right? And restorative justice might not necessarily address traumas. It might not necessarily address poverty. It might not necessarily address socially toxic environments and unemployment, right? It might not necessarily address racism, right? And gentrification and so on and so forth. And these are some of the things that our young people in our schools and in our diversion programs, right, have to deal with. And so what are we restoring things back to that? You know, that's not what we're doing at all, you know. And so I think, you know, we have to start thinking about, in order for there to be real healing, we also going to have to transform the conditions, right, that are giving rise to a lot of the behaviors in our young people that have them landing, you know, in trouble and in these spaces where they're in need of diversion and reconciliation and healing and so on and so forth. And so I just think that any concrete steps that we take has to be rooted in this type of deeper consciousness and conceptual frameworks. It's a different spirit.
Absolutely. That was also beautifully said. Thank you so much, Connie. I'm going to hand things over to Cymone for our next round of questions. I have a minor charger issue. I will be back in a second.
Thanks, Sia. And thanks so much for everything that has already been offered in this conversation. In a little over an hour, I think that there have been so many pockets of wisdom that you all have brought to this group that are going to kind of lay seeds for a different way for education to move forward. And I really appreciate that. One thing that I want to make sure we do is open up the space for each of you to, if you have a question for the other panelists, go ahead and have some space to ask that. And while you all have a chance to ask some questions of each other, if folks have questions that they want the panelists to address, please feel free to drop those in the chat and we'll try and take a couple of those and share those with the panelists. But I want to now just open up the floor to all of you, to Perry, Gani, Reuben, and Stephanie. Do you all have any questions of each other that you want to pose? And this can be open-ended to any of you. Yeah, go ahead, Gani.
I do have a question, not directed at anybody in particular, but all of my fellow esteemed panelists, and that is, what gives you hope and why?
I would like to go first. I give myself hope. I know that there's more potential in myself. I know that I'm able to be bigger and better than I am now. I know that I have a bright future, and I tell myself this. And so now, like, I have it in me. It's stuck in me every day. Like, I don't have a mom or a dad or a granny or a daddy to push me. I have myself, I have my siblings. And my siblings, they give me hope also because just they're little, the young, sweet souls. And I'm like, I have purpose now. So I give myself hope every day. I wake up and I tell myself, Periana, you gotta do it all over again. And I'm not crying sad tears or anything, but I'm crying tears of joy because I made it this far and I'm so proud of myself.
Thank you, Perry.
I have to
Go ahead, Reuben.
Thank you. Man, it's the consciousness of young people like Perry. That gives me hope, you know. And I reflect on my own upbringing. Man, I wasn't as conscious as these young people of this generation. Man, just to see your wisdom, your strength, your ability to like recognize and be aware of what's going on. Like I was clueless, man. I was clueless. So like young people, young people like you, that I know so many young people like you that I've come across, and man, just how intelligent, how amazing, how and just your ingenuity, you know, and just your ability to just come up with so much creative ideas on your own. That gives me hope. You know, that makes me feel like we're moving in a greater direction. To answer your question, Gani, yeah, man, I'm looking at it from, and even when we talked about like the crack, you know, generation that we came from, and coming from like the single parent homes to now, like you see a lot more young people, more strong and more outspoken and more, you know, vigilant and rebellious. You know, some people see rebellion as like this kid is defiant or disrespectful or rude, but from my perspective, it shows a lot of strength in their character. You know, that means they're not easily willing to be bought, you know, and they're not just going to submit to or conform to what this system is trying to force them to do. You know what I'm saying? So for me, it's just really seeing the power in the young people and how they express themselves, the fearlessness. You know, we call y'all the Nat Turner generation. Y'all just, you know, fearless, man, and ready to fight. So that's my hope. That's my hope.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. I mean, Perry, you got me over here. I'm like trying not to tear up and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if it wasn't for our young people. And I mean, they give me hope, they give me inspiration. They help me feel young and playful. Because even though they go through so much, they still find ways to find joy. And so that's why I do what I do. And that's where my hope and inspiration comes from them.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Gani, and for everyone who shared so much. Perry, I hope you can see the chat. I think you are giving so many people hope, and the hope that you have in yourself is contagious for the hope that we all can have for all y'all. So thank you for that. I do see one question in the chat and want to make sure that we get to it. It's a question for you, Reuben, about the circles that you've had a chance to facilitate. The question is, have there been any instances when the talk in the circle has gone nasty or volatile or things didn't go according to plan, and how do you handle that?
Whew. Yeah. It's been many circles where it went nasty or went wrong. And I can definitely attest to that, like in my early years, where I wasn't prepared well, or I didn't prep the folks for the circle. And I made assumptions that folks was gonna be acting accordingly, right? And one example, I had a young person that was having some issues with a teacher, and I was gonna bring them both to. This was a brother, you know, and a young Black man, and I was gonna bring them together to have a healing conversation. And I assumed that the teacher was gonna be on board with trying to like repair the harm that was done. And to my, you know, like just not being prepared, I was completely wrong, you know, and that teacher literally scolded that kid and you know, just like went off, and the kid pretty much was done. No, we lost the kid. And this was a kid that, like, if he didn't come to school, it's a wrap. He's going to be in the streets. It's a wrap. And for me, like when we do circles, like if you have an issue with something already or gets nasty, pause, stop the circle, take a pause, allow folks to take a breath, even if they have to leave the room for a second, give them a chance to just like kind of collect their thoughts. Because if you try to keep that circle going and then midst of chaos and volatile or whatever the situation is, or if there's like somebody in the room that's like creating more stress, you got to stop the circle, right? You can always come back to it, you know, and I could tell you off my own experience, I've stopped the circle, I allowed folks to take a break, and we came back and it was better many times, right? So if you do have a situation like that, stop it, allow folks to connect, you know, and get themselves right. And if you need to talk to folks individually to kind of prep them beforehand, do that, especially with harm and conflict circles. Like you should always prep, you should always ask questions. How are you feeling? How will you respond if this person says this? You know, you want to prep them, and you might even want to model it with them, you know, just to see, okay, if I'm this person, I say, no, you was lying. How are you going to respond to this? Right? And keep practicing until that person feels comfortable enough to be in space to take some accountability, but also be authentic and transparent with what happened, right? So never put folks in an uncomfortable situation and force them. I think Perry said this earlier, don't force anybody to participate in a circle. You know, it should be all pretty much not, it should be an invitation, not obligation. All right, it shouldn't be forced. All right, so just remember that. Don't ever force anybody to be in a circle, because that's not restorative justice. You know, if we're really trying to avoid from being punitive and using disciplinary actions to force somebody to do a circle, that's not restorative justice. All right, it has to be an invitation, not obligation.
I think what's also important in what Reuben said, what popped up for me, is that this is a process where you can't be rigid. You have to be attuned to what's going on. And I think that speaks to the part about how are you in a relationship with people. And so, yeah, I just appreciate that.
I would just add also that sometimes what might appear as volatile is actually not, right? And so it's also important to just be really in tune to different cultural cues, different ways of speaking and things like that. Maybe the way people interact in the circle that you've created is by cursing, is by, you know, raising their voice or talking fast. And that might not necessarily be a sign of, you know, someone getting aggressive or someone getting violent or being volatile. It just might be the way that someone communicates. It's also important in, you know, that, you know, as Reuben was talking about the importance of prepping people, in prepping people and in understanding the people that you're bringing together, really being in tune to, you know, communication that is actually harmful and communication that is actually just how someone expresses themselves.
Yeah, thanks everybody for fielding that question. And it seems like folks have appreciated the practical suggestions and helpful responses. So we are a bit over time, and I know folks have busy days, but I want to invite folks to join us for a few deep breaths together as we close out our time together and really breathe in all that has been shared and offered in this time together. So if we could just pause for a second, maybe close your eyes if it feels right, and just take 3 breaths in, or 3 breaths in. So we'll take 1 big deep breath in, hold that, and let it out. And do that 2 more times. So thank you again to everyone who took time out of their days to join us for this session. For those of you that have joined for additional sessions in the prior weeks, we are so grateful to have spent so much time in this community together. I hope everyone joins me in thanking our wonderful panelists who have shared so much with us today. I'm going to pass over to Laura, but for folks that are interested, we'll make sure with the permission of the panelists to, if folks are looking to stay in community and explore additional resources, we will share a link in an email afterwards so that folks can stay in community together and continue to figure out ways to bring these practices into their own spaces. So thank you again. And I'm going to pass over to Laura to close us out for our series.
Thank you so much, Cymone. And thank you to all of the panelists today. Over the last several weeks, but especially today, it has just been so incredibly powerful to build this community together, and hearing you all share your knowledge, but also being vulnerable with your stories. I mean, Gani asked what gives people hope, and places and communities like this give me hope, and I feel like are the reason why educators like myself are working and trying to do what we do. So thank you so much again for sharing your stories and for your commitment to healing. I know we've all learned a lot and are looking forward to creating those community environments in our classrooms built on relationships and thinking of the whole person. So thank you again. And thank you again to Cia and Cymone for leading us throughout these 3 sessions. We have so enjoyed working with you and learning from you in these spaces. Thank you to all of the attendees for creating this community together. And I hope that we can all continue to stay in touch and move forward within this global space of human rights educators. Please stay in touch and stay tuned for more events from RFK. We have another great series coming out this summer about human rights pedagogies to implement in subject-specific areas in your classroom, including utilizing human rights to enhance science and social studies and English language arts and the arts classes. But yes, so the lessons that we've taken from this series, I know that we can integrate in classes and learning environments and community environments across the board. So thank you so much to everyone again. And yeah, if Cia or Cymone or any of the wonderful panelists have any closing words, I would love to open the space for you again.
I think just gratitude for this partnership, gratitude for this space, gratitude for all the folks that took time to be with us all today and other sessions. I think gratitude is the word that's coming to mind for me.
Yeah, thank you all. Thank you, especially to our panelists, and also folks who I know it's late and on the other side of the world. So just want to thank everyone for joining us. And definitely feel free to, check out our website, impactjustice.org, reach out to us. And also I would encourage you to check out, Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth, RISE Youth Center, and then also the Youth Art and Self-Empowerment Project. So thank you all. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you. And recordings will be shared of the sessions for everyone who registered, just as a heads up. So we'll be able to rewatch and
Peace,
hear
everybody.
everyone's stories.
All right.
Yeah, y'all. Take care.
Bye. Thank you guys.
Bye, Perry.